Hey guys, this is Argent Templar, the character profile of Gustavo Gus Fring. So Gus, what can you say about Gus? Gus is one of the scariest characters in pretty much anything I've ever seen. He's just such a cold and calculating figure. Ultimately, his master plan spanned decades. So I normally don't do a summary of the person's life in these character profiles, but given the fact that we don't really know that much about Gus personally, going through his life will kind of prove the kind of man he is. So, it's strongly implied that Gus was a member of the CIA. What is the evidence for this? He was involved with Pinochet's regime and fled Chile from Mexico when Pinochet's regime ended. There's no record of him being in Chile. All they know is that he was in Chile and played some important role. Given his immense connections to the underworld, his seeming training, and his knowledge in general, I think it's fairly safe to say he has some kind of government intelligence or military training in his background. Furthermore, when his friend slash probable lover gets killed, the Mexican cartels say, "We know who you are. That's the only reason you're not dead." But keep in mind, this isn't Chile anymore, which seems to imply to me, anyways, he's someone too important to kill, which once again makes me think that he's a CIA agent. So, Gus flees Chile and goes to Mexico, where he partners up with Maximo, who is a skilled chemist who invents a very pure version of meth. The Mexican drug cartels are against the production of meth and succeed in and turn them down, killing Maximo in the process. Maximo is thought to be the only person Gus ever cared about, and it's highly implied that Gus is gay and that Maximo was his lover. So, Maximo was killed, and Gus decided he would dedicate the rest of his life to destroying the cartel and undoing everything that they had done. Which is kind of this is kind of bringing us to Gus. Gus is interestingly a very admirable character. Despite in many aspects being a sociopathic mass murderer, he is extremely articulate, intelligent, sophisticated, very capable of delaying pleasure, delaying his revenge. His plot literally took decades to perform and left him the undisputed drug kingpin of the Southwest, annihilating all of his opponents in the process. Um, he ran his organization with military efficiency and was skilled at picking competent subordinates, his only downfall being an alliance with Walt and his hatred of the Salamancas. Hector, I believe, was the one who killed um, his lover, which is partially why he hates him so much, and had dedicated himself to annihilating the entire Salamanca family. So, um, that being said, Gus immediately afterwards began his plan. In Mexico, he had run a couple restaurants called uh, La Polos Hernandez, I think it's called, or the Chicken Brothers. I'll just call it Polos, which he exported to New Mexico. Um, he began to establish a meth distribution hub in the Southwest and allowed his empire to be annexed by the cartel, becoming the cartel's head of meth distribution in the Southwest when the cartel eventually did decide to enter into the business. So Gus, as far as I can determine, is technically, for most of the series, a subordinate of the cartel. They do, however, treat him with a fair amount of respect, and it's clear that he is a local leader. He is a high ranking member of the cartel despite the estrangement. He sets up a chain of successful Polos restaurants throughout the Southwest, probably using some of his connections. Where he got the money is an interesting question. Once again, this could be a result of money he earned during his time in Chile or through his connections in the CIA. Perhaps the CIA was funding his enterprise as being an inside man to destroy the cartels from within. Regardless, Gus began to use his restaurants as a way of transporting meth around, placing the meth in sealed containers and placing the containers within uh, containers of batter, marking them with ultraviolet stars on top. This was an effective distribution system as any normal inspection would completely overlook it. No one suspected Gus because he used a lot of his wealth to become a local philanthropist, even famously funding various police departments throughout New Mexico, presenting himself as being a man of the law. Later on, the police were hesitant to investigate Gus because of the amount of money he brought in for them. So he kind of indirectly bribed them in a way that brought none of the suspicion of normal bribery, being an extremely effective technique. He also gave money to hospitals, etc. Gus lived in a normal upper middle class neighborhood and spent always made sure to appear at his restaurants, often working shifts there as a normal waiter, um, just to be highly visible and to give the impression that he spent all of his time at his business and that he had no time for other activities. Meanwhile, he was continuing to grow his empire. Wisely choosing Mike due to his undying loyalty and moral system to be his second in command, Gus was able to bring together an experienced team of shooters, hitmen, and drug dealers that were run with a great deal more order and control than the cartels. Gus never embraced outright brutality and always tried to maintain order and complete control over his organization, which led to a relative lack of power struggles. All of his underlings were well paid, and from my understanding, they were selected from ex military or ex police backgrounds and had little trouble following orders. So Gus was well liked by the men who served under him, and well liked by the cartel due to the efficiency with which he ran his business. There's very little to indicate that Gus was particularly corrupt when he ran his drug empire, meaning he didn't pocket immense amounts of money for himself. He probably paid himself a rather set percentage, and didn't spent money in a very kind of responsible fashion. Um, he didn't just spend it on wild shit. He was always very efficient from it. Actually, because of the nature of his indirect bribes to the police department, he was probably able to write his bribes off on his taxes, showing how cunning a man he was. During the events of Breaking Bad, he comes into contact with Walter White, as he needs Walter White as part of his ultimate plan to get his own supply of meth. Um, Realizing that Walter White is making the best quality of meth around the world, he invests an immense amount of money in creating a super lab that allows him to produce meth on an industrial scale and gets Walt to come and work for him. Walter White, he eventually indirectly blackmails by leaking to I believe he leaks to the cartel that Walt was involved with the death of what's his name, Tuco, and that Walt is behind the blue meth. So the cartel comes to take him down, but Gus is able to stop them using his position as the head of the cartel in New Mexico. Thus, Gus is able to gain Walt's loyalty, as Walt correctly believes that Gus was the only thing standing between him and his execution. Nevertheless, he pays Walt extremely well for his service, and tries to have a genial relationship with him. They have this really awkward date, and I get the impression to some extent Gus has begun to see Walt as being a replacement for Maximo as the brilliant chemist he lost. Gus's ultimate feelings for Walt are unknown, as are his feelings for Gail, who is also strongly implied to be gay. So, heading into the next part of the campaign, or just how things are heading out, Gus begins a campaign of terror against the cartels, using Mike to slaughter their men in New Mexico and hijack their meth shipments. This destabilizes the situation in New Mexico, and this combined with his um, industrial scale production of Walt's nearly chemically pure meth leads him to become the supreme kingpin of meth in the entire Southwest, yielding him immense amounts of money in the process. So as things continue to escalate with the cartel, it soon becomes apparent that they are attempting to destroy each other's businesses. Gus brokers a deal with the cartel where he will give Jesse, who can make meth almost as good as Waltz, to go down to Mexico and start making the uh, the meth in their lab. Jesse is successful in creating nearly pure meth in their lab, and the cartel decrees an end to their war, stating Gus can keep his business and all will be forgiven, and there will be no outright conflict between the two of them. So they go to the same estate in which Gus's partner Maximo was killed. Gus succeeds in swallowing a gel capsule when no one is looking, and everybody takes a drink of tequila. The tequila, unfortunately or fortunately, is full of toxin, and the entirety of the the entirety of the cartel very soon die. Prior to this, Gus had excused himself to the washroom and proceeds to vomit up all of the most of the poison. He does, however, ingest a small amount of it, and is uh, just out of commission for a while. As Gus walks back, he sees all the dead members of the cartel, realizing that his 20-year plan for revenge has finally come to fruition. Everything he had done had led up to this point. Gus is now left as the sole drug emperor of the Southwest United States, and he has succeeded in avenging Maximo and killing all of the people who wronged him. It is at the height of his power, though. Gus, however, has to go and gloat um, to Hector that he has killed every member of his family as well as all of his friends. Walt, however, beats him to Hector and plants a bomb under Hector's wheelchair, blowing it up and finally killing Gus. So, what is Gus's legacy? Gus, in essence, I think resembles everything that Walt would wishes he could be. A extremely rational, intelligent, dispassionate man who is capable of commanding respect, fear, and even admiration in others. Gus is able to think long term, a luxury which Walt does not have, and he has actually succeeded in building a real drug empire with loyal employees and set up methods of distribution. In contrast to Walt's feeble drug empire, in which he has no one actually working for him and all he gets in return is money, Gus actually succeeded in building a grand, an actual business. Um, Gus is also much more likable and personable personable when speaking to other people, in contrast to Walt's often abrasive personality. In essence, Gus is much like Walt in that his negative and positive characteristics are almost perfectly balanced, with him being a sociopathic mass murderer who's willing to go for decades waiting for revenge and kill probably hundreds or thousands of people by distributing extremely lethal drugs and using children even for his drug cartel. Um, while at the same time being an extremely capable businessman who did much for charity and whose rule lacked much of the random brutality of men like Tuco. So, that is a character profile of Gustavo Fring, aka Gus. This is Argent Templar, signing out.